How do the 0.1% of articulate speakers sound so clear? And the thing about articulate speakers is they don't have to fill that stereotype of what a good speaker is. Someone with great fluency, fancy vocabulary, amazing body language. It's actually a lot simpler and a lot more useful than those particular points. Because we've studied a bunch of articulate speakers. We've made a lot of videos about some of them on this channel as well. And the problem with a lot of articulate speakers is that for a lot of them, it comes naturally, so it's hard to come up with the process of how they really do it. But after watching, rewatching, and studying a lot of them, we've come up with at least a few systems that you and I can start applying in our daily lives as well. So in this video, we're going to get into the most common mistake that is stopping you from speaking articulately, how this one listening technique can directly impact how well you speak, and how to never have an articulation gap and achieve maximum clarity in any conversation. By the way, if you're new here, my name is Radeep from Frantically Speaking. We release communications content all the time. So if that's your thing, hit subscribe. And if you want to take your learning to the next level, you can click the link in the description to check out our courses and see if we can work together. Okay, the very first mistake I want to get into that stops us from speaking articulately is the echo chamber effect. This simply means when we speak, we tend to repeat the same word again and again, which makes us sound more confusing than clear. And if we can just learn to replace those words with synonyms, not even fancy vocabulary, it'll help us sound so much clearer. Look at this example. Let's say if I were to tell you, I think we should use this approach because this approach is the best approach. Since this approach has worked before, we should use this approach again. Now, of course, that's a bit exaggerated, but sometimes we end up speaking like this. But if we add a varied vocabulary to it, here's what it can sound like. I believe this method is the most effective since it has delivered strong results in the past. Given its proven success, it makes sense to implement it again. That's all. It's not fancy, it just uses a varied vocabulary. And that's the first thing we need to avoid, the echo chamber effect. If you notice yourself utilizing the same word again and again in a sentence, try to replace it with a synonym. The next thing is when we're in a conversation, to summarize and repeat a question back to the other person. So many times if somebody asks us a question and we think we've understood them, we speak and then there's a bit of a communication gap because we've not really answered that question. If this has happened to you, it's because we're not using the summarization principle. It simply means whatever they've said, we need to repeat it back to them in fewer words and then ask them if that's what they really meant to say. We tend to do this very often when people contact us to find out about our coaching services, where they'll tell us about their entire challenge and then before we tell them what we have to offer, we will repeat the entire problem back to them. So let's say for the past 10 minutes, if they spoke to us about, hey, I'm having a challenge with presentations, I'm not being able to articulate my points clearly, my tone is off, my body language feels weak, I'm just not able to speak very fluently, and overall I feel my communication is quite off, I'm not being able to progress, so on and so forth. We'll just summarize it back to them by saying, okay, I'm going to summarize my notes back to you, tell me if I've missed out on anything. So it seems you have three main challenges: articulation, confidence, and presentations. These three challenges are stopping you from moving ahead to a leadership position, and so you're looking to get them fixed. Have I heard you correctly? Now, one of two things can happen. They can say yes, in which case I can move on. And if they say no, then I'll get to know the information I have missed out on. This makes the other person feel heard and it ensures that what I say next is clearly compatible to what they need to hear. Along with this, articulate speakers also ensure that they don't beat around the bush much. This is known as burying the lead. When someone asks us a question, we go all round and round before we get to the main point. Instead, we want to start with the main point itself and then elaborate from there. That's where a fundamental communication frameworks, one we've spoken about very often on this channel called Oreo, comes into the picture. If somebody asks us a question, we need to start with our main opinion, O, then move on to the reason, R, then to the experience, E, and then end with the opinion again. So an example of this would be when, imagine if you're working somewhere, your boss walks in and asks you, hey, how do you think we can improve our team's workflow? Now, bearing the lead would result in responding to an answer with, I think there are many things we can do. Most of the processes are fine, but I think we can reduce some of the meetings we have maybe so that teams have more time to focus on their tasks. Instead, you can use Oreo by stating your opinion directly, giving your reason, experience, and ending with the opinion again by simply saying, I think we're having too many meetings, and we can reduce some of them to improve productivity. Some meetings are valuable, but a lot of them seem to just be breaking up the workflow. They're not allowing employees to really get into the creative mindset to generate good ideas. Last week, I tend to cut all our meetings from 30 minutes to 10 minutes itself. This has significantly reduced burnout. It's also increased people to take more calls and have better ideas. I think that's one aspect that we can really work upon by reducing overall meetings. And that's how we can use Oreo to avoid burying the lead. And finally, what articulate speakers tend to do to avoid any sort of misinformation is to simply conclude with a question where appropriate, which means if somebody asks you a question to clarify something and you respond back to them, you want to end with, does that answer your question? Or does that make sense? And then if they respond with no, we obviously know we haven't. And if they respond with yes, we can also judge their tone to ensure we've gotten them correctly. So if they say, yeah, completely, I got you, that means awesome, we can move ahead. But if I ask them, does that make sense? And if they say, yeah, then I know they've not really understood my point. So I will ask them again that it sounds like you're still unclear on something. You can let me know if there is any doubt in your mind. Or in a more casual setting, I'll just say, sounds like you're still unsure, what's up? And that allows me to have a conversation with fewer and fewer gaps. Now you have understood a few tips from me after analyzing a lot of other speakers. If you want examples of one of the most articulate speakers responding to questions, you can check out this whole video we've made on Priyanka Chopra right here.